You ever hear a steel chain drag across concrete at 5 in the morning? Sounds exactly like trouble. That sound ripped me out of sleep before my alarm even had the chance. Metal scraping slow and heavy across my driveway, like somebody was pulling an anchor through gravel. I rolled out of bed, still wearing yesterday's thermal shirt, and the cold Texas air hit my skin the second I opened the front door. The smell reached me first. Fresh weld smoke, burnt steel, hot metal cooling in damp morning air. My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up. Then I saw it. My front gate was sealed shut with a thick industrial chain wrapped through the bars 3 times and locked tight, with a bright orange construction padlock big enough to secure a bulldozer. Hanging from the middle of it was a laminated red notice stamped with the Willow Creek Estates HOA logo. Access restricted pending compliance review. I just stood there barefoot on the concrete while the chain swayed slightly in the wind. My welding truck sat trapped inside the property behind the gate along with $30,000 worth of fabrication equipment I needed for a ranch contract due that morning. Sparks still glowed faintly near one of the hinges where somebody had tack welded a steel plate over the latch. They hadn't just locked me out. They wanted to make a statement. Across the street, parked perfectly under the glow of a decorative street lamp, sat Brenda Whitmore's white Lexus SUV, clean enough to look plastic. The engine idled softly while condensation drifted from the exhaust. And there she was, standing beside it in cream-colored tennis clothes holding a stainless steel coffee tumbler like she was watching a parade. Brenda smiled when she saw me notice the gate. Not a normal smile either. The kind that never reaches the eyes. The kind people use when they think they've finally won. "Morning, Ethan," she called across the street in that fake sweet realtor voice of hers. "HOA board voted last night. Your property is officially under access restriction until those violations are resolved." Violations. That word nearly made me laugh. The violations were things like my welding trailer being visible from the road, the sound of grinders after 6 p.m., a stack of steel tubing beside my workshop. Brenda hated my business because she hated anything that reminded her this neighborhood used to belong to working people before real estate money showed up. Willow Creek Estates used to be ranch land. Now it was full of imported palm trees, fake stone mailboxes, and HOA board members who treated cul-de-sacs like private kingdoms. I walked closer to the gate, boots crunching against gravel, and touched the fresh weld near the hinge. Still warm. That meant they'd done this less than an hour ago. I could hear the faint hum of my generator inside the shop building where I'd left it charging overnight. Locked behind my own gate like I was some kind of criminal. Brenda took a sip of coffee and tilted her head. "Maybe now you'll finally start respecting community standards." That was the moment something inside me went cold and perfectly calm. Because what Brenda Whitmore didn't know was that I'd spent 22 years building security gates for oil fields, machine yards, and private ranches across Texas. And if there's one thing I understand better than steel, it's exactly how to make a gate stay shut. Most people think welding is just sparks and noise. They see a guy in a leather hood standing behind blue light and assume it is brute force. But steel has rules. Pressure has rules. Hinges, locks, stress points, expansion joints. Everything obeys physics whether people respect it or not. That is what Brenda never understood. By 6 that morning, the Texas sun had started bleeding orange over the rooftops while I stood at my locked gate drinking coffee gone cold in my hand. Neighbors slowed down during their morning jogs, pretending not to stare. I could hear whispers floating across the street with the smell of wet grass and sprinkler mist. What happened? Did the HOA finally crack down on him? Funny thing is, nobody ever complains when they need something welded. Half the custom gates in Willow Creek were built in my shop. The decorative steel arch at the subdivision entrance? Mine. The wrought iron pool fencing around Brenda's precious clubhouse? Mine too. 3 years earlier, before she decided I was the neighborhood problem, she used to brag about my craftsmanship to potential homebuyers. Hand-forged local steelwork, she would say with that fake luxury sales smile. Back then I was useful. Then property values climbed, investors started moving in, and suddenly people like me became an eyesore. My workshop sat behind my house inside a 40 by 60-foot steel building with roll-up doors facing the gravel drive. Every morning smelled like cutting oil, hot metal, and cedar dust from the ranch properties around us. I like that smell. Honest smell. Earned smell. I spent 22 years building gates all over Texas. Oil companies. storage facilities, horse ranches, private hunting land. Rich people love security until the guy installing it parks a welding truck in their neighborhood. Brenda especially hated my service truck. Said it looked industrial. Truth was, she hated what it represented. Work, sweat, noise, reality. Her world was all staged open houses, wine tastings, and HOA meetings where grown adults argued about mailbox colors for 2 hours straight. Around 7:30, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Missed calls from clients. Texts asking where I was. One ranch manager from Burnett County sent me a message in all caps saying his cattle gate project was already behind schedule. I stared at the screen while hearing Brenda's Lexus pull away down the street. The smooth purr of that expensive engine sounded smug somehow. She thought trapping my truck inside the property would humiliate me into compliance. Instead, all she really did was give me time to think. And I do my best thinking around steel. I walked into the workshop through the side entrance and flipped on the overhead lights. The familiar hum echoed through the building as rows of clamps, torches, and welding helmets came into view. My old fabrication table sat in the center, covered in metal filings that glittered silver under the fluorescent lights. I ran my hand across the surface and looked at the wall where dozens of gate blueprints hung clipped beside permits and inspection certificates. Then something clicked in my head. Not anger. Not revenge exactly. More like recognition. Because every security gate has one weakness. Not the lock. Not the chain. The installation. People get lazy during installation. Especially rich neighborhoods trying to cut corners on permits. I wiped grease off my fingers with a shop rag and suddenly remembered something from 2 summers ago when my crew installed Brenda Whitmore's decorative front gate. Something small. Something most people would never notice. But welders notice everything. 2 summers earlier, Brenda Whitmore stood in my workshop wearing spotless white sneakers while complaining that the sample gate panels looked too ranch style. I remember it because she spent 45 minutes rejecting designs she had personally picked from my catalog the week before. The smell of fresh primer filled the shop while ceiling fans pushed hot August air around us. And the entire time, she kept talking to me like I was a malfunctioning appliance instead of the guy building her custom gate by hand. I want elegance, Ethan, she said back then, running perfectly manicured nails across unfinished steel. This neighborhood is evolving. Evolving. That was Brenda's favorite word. She used it every time she wanted to erase something she considered too blue-collar for Willow Creek Estates. Old trucks, utility trailers, kids playing basketball in driveways, American flags bigger than HOA guidelines allowed. The woman treated suburban life like she was curating an outdoor shopping mall. I should have walked away from that gate contract the second she asked if my crew could park somewhere less visible during installation. But work is work. And back then I still believed being professional mattered more than pride. So my guys and I spent 4 straight days building Brenda's decorative front entrance. 12-foot wrought iron double swing gate. Custom scrollwork. Powder-coated black finish. Limestone columns on both sides with hidden wiring for keypad entry. She wanted it to look like a country estate even though her property sat on less than half an acre. The whole project cost her almost $28,000, and she complained about every penny. I still remember the heat radiating off the steel while we installed the hinges. My gloves were soaked through with sweat by noon. The cicadas screaming from the trees sounded like faulty electrical lines buzzing overhead. Brenda spent most of the install sitting under a patio umbrella sipping iced lemon water while criticizing my crew for leaving tire marks on the curb. Then came the moment I could not stop thinking about that morning in my shop. Her husband, Doug, pulled me aside near the garage while Brenda was busy arguing about paint sheen. Doug smelled like expensive aftershave and golf course sunscreen. Quiet guy. The kind of husband who looked permanently exhausted from apologizing for his wife. He lowered his voice and pointed toward the hinge post. Look, he said, the permit office is already dragging this out. Brenda wants the gate operational before the HOA gala next month. Can we skip the county inspection? I remember staring at him while my welding machine crackled nearby. Because in Texas, automatic residential gates have rules. Emergency access clearance. Manual release compliance. Fire department override spacing. Nothing complicated if you do things right. But permits cost money and inspections take time. Doug gave me this nervous little shrug and said, nobody checks these neighborhoods anyway. That was the moment everything changed. I refused to bypass the safety inspection. Told him flat out I would not risk my license. Brenda overheard the conversation, and her entire face tightened like cold leather. She smiled afterward, but it was different after that day. Sharp, calculated, like she had quietly moved me onto some mental list. The county inspection eventually happened 2 weeks later, but Brenda rushed the landscaping and electrical modifications afterward without updating the paperwork. Decorative stone planters too close to swing clearance. Secondary locking brackets added by some handyman. Worst of all, they installed reinforced latch plates that partially blocked emergency manual access. Small details, easy to miss unless you build gates for a living. Standing in my workshop that morning with the smell of machine oil hanging in the air, I suddenly realized something important. Brenda's gate was not fully code compliant anymore. And if county inspectors ever took a close look at those modifications, they would have questions. Expensive questions. I leaned against my fabrication table listening to the distant hum of lawn equipment outside, while a slow grin spread across my face for the first time all day. Because Brenda Whitmore had just made one very expensive mistake. She turned a welder into a man with free time. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew about my gate. That is how HOA people operate. They spread humiliation faster than wildfire because embarrassment is their favorite currency. I could feel eyes following me every time I stepped outside. Window blinds shifted. Garage doors cracked open an inch. Even the air felt tense, heavy with fresh-cut grass and silent judgment. Around 1 in the afternoon, a black golf cart rolled slowly past my driveway, carrying 2 HOA board members wearing matching polo shirts like they were part of some suburban police force. One of them took pictures of my locked gate, while the other scribbled notes onto a clipboard. I leaned against my mailbox watching them without saying a word. The chain around my entrance rattled softly every time the wind picked up. That sound was starting to crawl under my skin. Then my phone buzzed again. Another email from the HOA. The subject line read Community Enforcement Update. Real dramatic. I opened it standing in the shade beside my driveway, while sweat trickled down my back under the Texas heat. According to Brenda, my property had now been classified as a commercial nuisance site pending corrective action. She attached 6 violation photos. One showed my welding trailer parked beside the workshop. Another zoomed in on steel stock stacked behind a privacy fence. One picture literally showed a pair of muddy work boots near my garage door, like footwear itself had become a threat to civilization. At the bottom of the email was the real punch. Daily fines would continue until I removed industrial visual contamination from the property. Industrial visual contamination. That woman talked about welders like we leaked toxic waste instead of building half the infrastructure in Texas. 30 minutes later, things got worse. My client from Burnett County called personally. I could hear diesel engines rumbling in the background and cattle bawling through the phone while he apologized. "Ethan, I hate doing this," he said. "But if you cannot access your equipment, I have got to move the project to another crew." I stared through the bars of my own gate while hearing that contract disappear in real time. $8,000 gone because Brenda Whitmore wanted to play neighborhood dictator. My jaw tightened so hard I could taste copper in the back of my mouth. But the part that really pushed me over the edge happened later that evening. Around sunset, the HOA posted pictures of my property onto the community Facebook page. Somebody had taken photos from angles that made my workshop look cluttered and chaotic. Brenda wrote a long paragraph about protecting neighborhood standards and preserving luxury home values. Comments started piling up underneath. Most were from the usual HOA crowd. People who wore boat shoes to grocery stores and treated landscaping like religion. One woman said my shop made the street feel unsafe. Another complained that welding sparks probably lowered property values. Property values. Funny hearing that from people whose gates, fences, and decorative ironwork all came out of my shop. I sat in the workshop office staring at those comments while the smell of burnt steel lingered in the air from a project I had been forced to abandon halfway through. Outside, cicadas screamed through the warm evening darkness while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Then I heard tires crunch against gravel. Brenda's Lexus slowed in front of my house again. This time she stopped completely. Her window rolled down halfway. "You still have time to cooperate, Ethan," she called out calmly. "The board is willing to be reasonable." Reasonable. She had chained shut my property, cost me a major contract, publicly humiliated me online, and now wanted gratitude for negotiation. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, glowing red against the dark like warning lights. Then I looked back at the unfinished steel gate sitting on my fabrication table, and something finally settled into place inside my head. Brenda thought she was teaching me a lesson about control. What she did not realize was that every welder eventually learns the same thing. Steel expands under pressure, and eventually something gives. The strange thing about humiliation is how quiet it gets after the anger burns off. By 10 that night, Willow Creek Estates looked peaceful again. Porch lights glowing soft yellow. Sprinklers ticking across perfect lawns. Somebody down the block grilled burgers because I could smell charcoal drifting through the warm air every time the breeze shifted. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my workshop with a half-finished cup of black coffee going cold beside the welding table and $18,000 in canceled contracts sitting on my phone screen. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly while I stared at Brenda's HOA violation emails lined up one after another like parking tickets from hell. Every single one signed with her name at the bottom. Brenda Whitmore, HOA President, Community Standards Director. The titles sounded ridiculous until you realized she actually believed them. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the faint metallic ticking of cooling steel from a project I had abandoned that morning. Welders know that sound well. Hot metal settling under stress. Tiny expansions and contractions you can hear in complete silence if you pay attention. Tick, tick, tick. Funny how pressure always leaves evidence eventually. Around 11, I finally walked back outside. The night air felt thick and humid against my skin, carrying the smell of cut grass and fresh asphalt from the subdivision entrance. My locked front gate stood under the moonlight like a prison fence. The heavy chain Brenda installed reflected silver every time passing headlights crossed it. I walked up slowly and ran my fingers across the weld bead they had slapped over the latch plate. Ugly work. Fast work. Whoever did it rushed the job. Probably some handyman Brenda hired because no licensed welder with self-respect would leave beads that sloppy. I crouched lower and looked carefully at the hinge alignment. Then I smiled, because locking my gate had forced me to notice something important. Brenda's people did not understand gate stress distribution at all. They reinforced the wrong side, which meant the entire weight load now shifted unevenly across the mounting brackets every time temperature changed overnight. Texas heat during the day. Cool humidity after dark. Expansion. Contraction. Pressure building exactly where it should not. I stood there listening to crickets buzzing in the drainage ditch nearby, while an idea slowly formed in my head piece by piece like a blueprint drawing itself. Not revenge exactly. Precision. Brenda weaponized HOA rules because she thought rules only applied downward. People like her always assume working men stay too busy surviving to fight back intelligently. But I build structures for a living. Every gate I fabricate starts with measurements, pressure calculations, weak points. The trick is never force. The trick is understanding where stress already exists. That was when my phone buzzed again. Another neighborhood Facebook notification. Somebody had uploaded a photo of my locked gate with laughing emojis underneath. One comment read, "Looks like the welder finally got welded out." Another person joked about property values improving already. I stared at those comments while feeling something cold settle behind my ribs. Not rage. Clarity. They all thought this was funny because they believed Brenda controlled access, controlled reputation, controlled the neighborhood itself. But control built on shortcuts never lasts long. I looked across the dark subdivision toward the oversized stone entrance leading into Brenda's property. I could picture her decorative iron gate perfectly from memory. The hidden motor housing, the custom latch assembly, the secondary reinforcement brackets her husband added after inspection, the exact weld points behind the hinge plates. Every shortcut, every violation, every corner they cut to save money and avoid county paperwork. Then the final piece clicked into place so clearly I actually laughed out loud standing alone in the driveway. The sound echoed off the steel bars in front of me. Because Brenda had spent months trying to teach me about compliance while living behind a gate that technically should never have passed inspection in the first place. The next morning, I did not call a lawyer. I did not argue with the HOA board. And I definitely did not waste time typing angry comments into the neighborhood Facebook page like half the people in Willow Creek seemed addicted to doing. No, I drove my old backup pickup into town before sunrise with the windows down and the smell of rain hanging low in the Texas air. The county records office opened at 8 sharp, and by 7:45 I was already sitting outside with black coffee in one hand and Brenda Whitmore's property address written on a folded notepad in the other. The woman behind the records counter knew me by name. Small towns work that way. She wore reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck and smelled faintly like peppermint gum and printer toner. "You hear about permits again, Ethan?" she asked while pulling up property files on her computer. I gave her a tired smile. "Just checking compliance records." That word almost made me laugh saying it out loud. Compliance. Brenda loved that word until somebody pointed it back at her. The county database loaded slowly while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Then the permit history finally appeared on screen. Original gate permit filed 2 years ago. Passed initial inspection. Closed project status. But underneath that were photographs from the final inspection report, and the second I saw them, I knew I had her. The gate in the county photos looked different from the one standing at Brenda's house now. Cleaner. Simpler. No decorative stone planters near the swing path. No secondary reinforcement brackets. No aftermarket locking plates. Those additions came later, meaning none of them had been inspected. Worse than that, one photo clearly showed the emergency manual release clearance before Doug modified the hinge assembly himself. I felt the corners of my mouth twitch upward while zooming closer on the image. Because Texas County Code is very specific about residential emergency gate access. You cannot install obstructions within required release clearance zones without permit revision approval. Sounds boring until you realize violating that rule can trigger daily fines, forced modifications, and mandatory inspection holds. In other words, exactly the kind of bureaucratic nightmare Brenda loved using against other people. I copied every document legally available and slid the papers into a manila folder while my pulse stayed perfectly calm. That was the funny part. I was not angry anymore. Angry people make mistakes. Welders survive by staying steady. Precision matters more than emotion when you are working with heat. By the time I got back to Willow Creek, the afternoon sun had turned the subdivision roads white with glare. Sprinklers hissed across bright green lawns while delivery trucks rolled through the neighborhood, dropping off Amazon packages at houses that all looked increasingly identical. I parked near my locked gate and noticed another bright orange HOA notice zip-tied to the chain. Additional fines pending. I did not even bother reading it. Instead, I walked into my workshop and unlocked a small steel cabinet beside the fabrication table. Inside sat my portable field welder, extra rods, protective blankets, magnetic clamps, and a compact generator I used for remote ranch jobs. The smell of machine oil and dust drifted out the second the cabinet opened. I stood there quietly assembling equipment piece by piece while blueprints rustled softly from the ceiling fan overhead. Outside, distant thunder rolled somewhere across the hills. Summer storms building. Then my phone buzzed again. Neighborhood Facebook notification. Somebody had posted another picture of my locked gate with laughing emojis underneath. But this time, I noticed something different. Brenda herself commented publicly. Actions have consequences. Community standards matter. I stared at those words for several long seconds while rain started tapping softly against the workshop roof. Then I looked down at the county permit photos spread across my fabrication table beside my welding gloves. Brenda thought gates existed to keep people in line. I understood something she never would. Gates only work when the person controlling them follows the same rules as everybody else. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Low thunder rattled the windows of my workshop while rainwater hissed against the gravel outside. Perfect welding weather. Most people hate working in storms because moisture changes everything. Visibility drops. Steel cools differently. Sound carries farther through wet air. But I have always liked storms. They make the world quieter. By 1:30 in the morning, Willow Creek Estates looked dead. No porch lights. No golf carts. No joggers pretending not to stare. Just rain sliding across rooftops and tree branches swaying under heavy wind. I backed my old pickup slowly out of the workshop using the side drive Brenda's people had forgotten about when they chained my front gate. The portable field welder sat strapped in the truck bed beside my equipment cases covered under a canvas tarp. The engine rumbled low while windshield wipers scraped steadily across the glass. Every streetlight reflected off the wet pavement like liquid gold. Brenda's house sat near the subdivision entrance behind her oversized decorative gate and fake limestone columns. Even in the rain, the place looked staged. like a real estate brochure pretending to be a home. I parked half a block away beside the drainage ditch and killed the headlights. The rain masked almost every sound except distant thunder and the occasional metallic ping from my cooling tailpipe. My boots sank slightly into the wet grass as I carried the equipment toward the gate. The smell of rain, ozone, and damp cedar filled the air. I moved calmly because calm matters when you weld. Rushed work leaves scars. Brenda's gate stood closed in front of me, glossy black under the streetlights, exactly the way I remembered building it. I ran my hand along the hinge housing and almost laughed. Doug's aftermarket reinforcement brackets were still there. Unpermitted. Uninspected. Blocking emergency release clearance exactly like the county photos showed. That was the beauty of shortcuts. They always remain hidden until somebody who understands structure takes a closer look. I draped protective blankets over the stone columns, connected the generator cables, and slipped on my welding hood. Then the world narrowed into blue light and steel. The first arc crackled through the rain like lightning trapped inches from my face. Orange sparks bounced across wet concrete and disappeared into puddles with tiny hissing sounds. I worked methodically. Hinge plates first, then secondary latch reinforcement. Not destructive, not reckless. Just enough clean structural weld to permanently immobilize the gate assembly without damaging the decorative ironwork itself. Technically speaking, I was reinforcing existing contact points. That distinction mattered. Rain drummed softly against my welding hood, while hot steel glowed orange beneath the torch. Every weld bead settled smooth and precise because unlike the sloppy handyman job Brenda's crew did on my gate, I actually respected craftsmanship. 22 years of fabrication teaches patience. Halfway through the final hinge brace, headlights swept briefly across the far end of the street. I killed the arc instantly and stood still beside the gate while rainwater dripped from my gloves. A neighborhood security patrol rolled slowly past the intersection without turning down Brenda's street. The moment the lights disappeared, I finished the final weld. Tick, 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 cooling steel again. Same sound I heard in my workshop days earlier. Only this time it echoed from Brenda Whitmore's own front entrance. I packed my equipment carefully, wiped rainwater from the latch assembly, and took one last look at the gate before walking away. From the outside, everything appeared normal. Elegant even. No visible damage. No broken locks. No graffiti. Just a perfectly beautiful gate that was never opening again without county inspectors taking a very long look at every illegal modification. Brenda discovered the problem at exactly 7:16 the next morning. I know the time because her screaming echoed across Willow Creek Estates before I even finished pouring coffee. The sound cut through the neighborhood sharp enough to stop sprinklers and barking dogs alike. I stepped onto my back porch holding a black ceramic mug while humid morning air wrapped around the subdivision like wet fabric. Then I heard it. The strained electric whine of Brenda's gate motor fighting against 6 fresh weld points that were never going to move. The motor groaned harder. Metal creaked. Then silence. A few seconds later came another scream. I took a slow sip of coffee while sunlight reflected off rainwater still sitting in puddles along the street. Across the neighborhood, garage doors started opening one by one as curious residents wandered outside pretending to collect newspapers or check mailboxes. Everybody loves HOA drama when it happens to somebody else. By 8 o'clock, Brenda's driveway looked like a failed construction site. Her husband Doug stood outside in golf clothes holding a remote opener while 2 landscaping trucks idled uselessly behind the gate. The smell of diesel exhaust drifted through the warm air while workers argued in Spanish near the curb. Brenda paced back and forth in oversized sunglasses barking orders into her phone like she was coordinating a hostage negotiation instead of dealing with a stuck gate. Then the county inspector arrived. White pickup truck. Orange safety vest. Clipboard tucked under one arm. I nearly laughed when I saw Brenda's posture change instantly from outrage to panic. Because deep down, she already knew exactly why they were there. County inspectors do not randomly appear in wealthy neighborhoods before 9 in the morning unless somebody filed a formal compliance complaint. The inspector spent 15 minutes examining the gate while Brenda hovered beside him, talking nonstop. Even from across the street, I could hear her favorite phrases floating through the air. Community standards. Unauthorized tampering. Harassment. But the inspector barely responded. He kept crouching beside the hinge assembly instead, measuring clearance spacing, and taking photographs of the aftermarket brackets Doug installed. Finally, he stepped back and shook his head once. Even at a distance, I recognized that expression immediately. It was the look professionals make when rich people realize rules apply to them too. By noon, bright orange violation notices were taped directly onto Brenda's stone entrance columns. Emergency access obstruction. Unpermitted structural modifications. Mandatory compliance review pending. Temporary operational freeze until corrected and re-inspected. Operational freeze. Such a polite government phrase for your gate is officially dead. The best part was watching the neighborhood reaction shift in real time. The same people posting laughing emojis under photos of my locked gate suddenly grew very quiet online. Nobody wanted to publicly defend Brenda once county paperwork entered the picture. HOA power only feels absolute until real authority shows up carrying clipboards and municipal code books. Over the next week, everything spiraled beautifully. Delivery drivers could not access Brenda's circular driveway. Landscapers dragged equipment through side fencing by hand under brutal Texas heat, while neighbors watched from shaded porches. One afternoon, a luxury furniture truck blocked traffic for 40 minutes because the gate would not open wide enough for unloading access. Then came the real disaster. The county demanded engineering documentation for every structural gate modification completed after original inspection approval. Brenda and Doug did not have any. No permits. No updated approvals. No licensed contractor sign-offs. Just shortcuts hidden behind decorative stone and HOA arrogance. Every conversation in Willow Creek suddenly turned toward Brenda instead of me. At the grocery store. At the gas station. In Facebook comments. People started whispering about fines, lawsuits, code enforcement, and possible insurance issues. Funny how fast suburban loyalty disappears once property values feel threatened. Meanwhile, my own front gate remained chained shut exactly where Brenda left it. But now the neighborhood saw it differently. Not as punishment, as evidence. I would walk past that chain each morning hearing distant grinding noises from Brenda's property, while contractors failed over and over trying to free her gate without violating county orders. Tick. Grind. Silence. Tick. The sound of expensive mistakes cooling slowly under pressure. 6 months later, Brenda Whitmore's gate still had county warning stickers fading under the Texas sun. By that point, the entire thing had become local legend. Contractors came and went. Engineers showed up with measuring tools and clipboards. Lawyers parked outside her house almost weekly in glossy black SUVs that reflected heat like mirrors. Every repair attempt uncovered another violation buried beneath the last shortcut. Incorrect clearance spacing. Unapproved reinforcement plates. Electrical modifications without updated permits. The deeper inspectors looked, the worse it got. What started as one frozen gate turned into a complete compliance investigation involving half the HOA entrance structures in Willow Creek Estates. Funny how quickly community standards disappear once real inspectors start asking questions. My own gate finally got unlocked 3 weeks after the county got involved. Not by the HOA. By sheriff deputies carrying removal authorization paperwork after my attorney filed unlawful access restriction complaints. I still remember the metallic clank of that heavy chain dropping onto the concrete. Sounded different after everything that happened. Lighter somehow. The deputy handing me the paperwork smelled faintly like cigarette smoke and old leather. He glanced toward Brenda's property down the street and quietly muttered, "Looks like she picked the wrong guy to mess with." I never answered. I just reopened my gate slowly while morning sunlight spilled across the driveway into my workshop for the first time in weeks. The smell inside hit me immediately. Steel dust, machine oil, burnt metal, home. Business came back fast after that. Turns out ranch owners trust welders who stand their ground. Within a month, I had more contracts than I could handle. New cattle gates, equipment fencing, custom fabrication jobs from 3 different counties. One older rancher even laughed while signing a contract and said, "Anybody who can outlast an HOA president can definitely build a gate." Meanwhile, Brenda's situation kept getting worse. HOA board meetings turned ugly once legal fees started draining community reserves. Residents who used to worship her suddenly wanted explanations about fines, inspections, and dropping property interest from potential buyers scared off by county notices hanging near the subdivision entrance. Nobody likes authoritarian leadership once invoices arrive. Doug stopped attending meetings completely. Brenda herself barely left the house except to argue with contractors and inspectors. The same neighbors who mocked my locked gate now whispered every time her landscaping crews parked outside. Eventually, the HOA board forced a vote. Brenda lost her presidency by a landslide. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of her house beside the same decorative gate she once treated like a trophy. The irony almost felt too perfect. I saw her one final time near the mailbox cluster at the subdivision entrance late one evening in early October. The air smelled like dry leaves and distant wood smoke from somebody burning brush outside town. Brenda looked older somehow. Tired. She avoided eye contact while gathering letters from her mailbox with stiff movements like her shoulders carried invisible weight. For a second, I thought she might say something. Maybe apologize. Maybe blame me. But she stayed silent. So did I? Some victories do not need speeches. A week later, moving trucks hauled furniture out of her driveway, while contractors finally removed the gate under county supervision. I watched from my workshop as grinders threw bright orange sparks into the evening air. Tick, grind, tick. Same sounds that started everything months earlier. Only now the noise belonged to her. That night, I stayed late finishing a custom ranch entrance under the soft glow of overhead shop lights, while cool autumn air drifted through the open bay doors. Around midnight, I shut off the welding torch and listened to the steel cooling in the silence. Tick, tick, tick. Funny thing about gates. People think they exist to keep others out. But eventually, every gate reveals who was trapped behind it all along.